And more now on Judge Barrett. The 48-year-old mother from Indiana would be the youngest justice on the bench if confirmed by lawmakers. Her confirmation would also seal the conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And there are already reports circulating around the Senate regarding a schedule for Judge Barrett's confirmation hearings. The rumored schedule puts the start of those hearings on October 12th, just a little over 2 weeks out. Now, those hearings would last 4 days, and then the Senate could vote on Judge Barrett's nomination on October 29th, just 5 days from Election Day. And shortly after the announcement, Connecticut leaders began weighing in on the president's pick to replace the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Fox 61's Brian Didlake has that, plus expert insight from a local law professor.
In terms of reaction, they are what you'd expect, some for and some against, depending on party affiliation. But one law professor says that he doesn't see any major roadblocks for the nominee.
There's nothing obvious which would stand in her way to being confirmed.
UConn law professor Richard Kay says when it comes to the hearing soon to be set for Supreme Court Justice nominee Amy Coney Barrett, it'll be much like what America has already seen before with previous Trump nominees. Friendly questioning from Republicans, then a sharp turn to major criticism from Democrats.
I've yet to hear, I neither know nor have I heard about anyone who knows her personally who doesn't think she's great.
President Trump saying this pick is historical if confirmed by the Senate.
If confirmed, Justice Barrett will make history as the first mother of school-age children ever to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Barrett in her nomination speech vowing to uphold the law no matter what.
A judge must apply the law as written. Judges are not policymakers, and they must be resolute in setting aside any policy views they might hold.
Connecticut's senators reacting to the news moments after the president's announcement. Senator Chris Murphy saying the handpicked Trump nominee would threaten Connecticut residents, especially those relying on the Affordable Health Care Act, followed by Senator Richard Blumenthal, who agrees, saying Barrett has already been vetted by the Trump administration and would threaten the decision seen in Roe v. Wade. We did reach out to the other side of the aisle, but have not heard back at this time. But if you look online, you'll see that many critics are questioning the legality of this nominee pick, saying that it's too close to an election.
There's no legal issue. The issue is entirely a political one, and it has to do with what role ought popular politics play in the selection of the Supreme Court justice.
Other organizations sending in their reactions. Members of Planned Parenthood called Barrett's nomination an insult to the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who fought so hard for women's rights, especially in cases of abortion.
When asked about this, when she was being confirmed for the Seventh Circuit seat, she was emphatic that her personal views on the rightness or wrongness of actions generally, but in this case of abortions, would not influence her decisions.
The president is calling for what he calls a respectful and dignified hearing and hopes the process will be swift. But only time will tell. We're in Hartford. Brian Didlake, Fox 61 News.